The sun was folding low over the prairie, draping gold across the bent grasses, and barbed wire like an ode sung too slow. The road out past Bitterroot Creek ran straight as an oath, but not many took it unless they were running from something or had nowhere else to go. Boaz Cutter, 38 and quiet by habit, rode it twice a week, once to sell eggs and once to remember what other voices sounded like. His mare, Mabel, moved steady beneath him, hips rocking gentle, hooves brushing dust off the trail without hurry. Boaz didn't ride for speed. His life had slowed the same way old storms do. Loud once, now more memory than threat. That's when he saw it. At first, just a shape in the dying light, too still to be a coyote, too long to be brush. Closer, the shape became a woman, thin, stooped, tied at the wrist to a cedar fence post like something discarded, forgotten, or punished. The wind caught the hem of her skirt, lifting it just enough to reveal bare ankles streaked with dried blood and dirt. Her head hung like a flower too long in the heat. Boaz stopped. No sound, no exclamation. Just dismounted like it was any other chore and stepped toward her. The woman didn't move, not even when he spoke low. "Ma'am." He knelt beside her, careful. She had one shoe. No bonnet. Her gray hair was tangled in long ropes, clinging to her neck like sorrow. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder, not from violence, but from wear. Her skin looked like thin parchment, creased, spotted, sun-warmed, and wind-chapped. He reached for her wrists. Rope it deep, but not fresh. Whoever left her hadn't checked back. "I'm going to cut you loose now," he said, voice like river gravel. Her lips moved, but only a soundless breath came. He didn't ask who or why. That part could wait. He just pulled his knife and sawed the rope away in slow, steady strokes, as if hurry might tear something more than skin. When the last strand dropped, her weight tipped. Boaz caught her. She was lighter than she looked. Her bones shifted in his arms like they didn't trust him yet. He carried her the way a man carries shame, not proudly, but with care. Mabel snorted, sensing something unspoken. Boaz lifted the woman into the back of the wagon, bundled under burlap and hay. He didn't lay her flat, but propped her slightly, so her lungs wouldn't fight harder than they needed to. She hadn't said a word yet. He climbed up, took the reins, and turned homeward. By the time the ranch came into view, dusk had deepened into bruised plum. The sky held its breath, and even the chickens didn't cluck when he rode in. The lantern on the porch flickered once, as if startled. He carried her into the house, laid her on the settee by the hearth, removed his hat, tended to the kettle. Still no word from her, but her eyes opened, just a sliver, and they weren't empty. She watched the fire like it might judge her. Boaz brought a chip bowl of warm broth and a cloth to clean her wrists. She flinched once, then let him. "I'm Boaz Cutter," he said, as if names were still worth something. No reply, but she sipped the broth. Shaky hands, then set it down herself. A small act, a brave one. Later that night, after she'd slept in the guest room with a warm blanket over her legs and a tin basin set near the bed, he sat on the porch, smoking, listening to the quiet. The ranch hadn't heard a woman's footsteps in over a decade, not since his mother passed. Boaz hadn't buried her so much as tucked her away in memory. The house had stopped smelling like cinnamon and dried lavender long ago, but now it smelled like something else. Age, dust, grace. At sunrise, she stood in the doorway, barefoot still. She leaned on the frame, her body half shadow, half ember. She looked like she had been carved out of something older than sorrow. "I was too much trouble," she said, her voice like cracked porcelain. Boaz didn't ask who left her. She looked around the room like she expected it to reject her. "You should have left me." "I didn't," he said. The next day, he rode into town for supplies. The general store sat like a confession box on the edge of Main Street. Eloise Tappan saw him walking with extra sugar and thread in his basket. "Got a woman up there now, Cutter?" she asked, thinly amused. He didn't answer, just set the coin on the counter. "Careful," she called after him. "They say the old ones don't just haunt, they linger." By the time he returned, she was sitting on the porch with a shawl pulled tight and a tin cup between her palms. She looked at him like she didn't know where to place him. A stranger who didn't ask questions. A man who didn't need answers to offer warmth. She said, "You'll regret it." He said, "That's so." She gave a slow nod. "We're like stray dogs, old women. Take us in, and the neighbors start staring. Call it charity. Call it madness." Boaz looked past her, toward the fence where the morning sun now warmed the cedar rail she'd once been tied to. He replied, "Some things get left behind that still deserve to be carried home." That night, the wind howled across the open fields. He lit a second lantern for the hallway and left her door cracked, in case she needed anything, in case the house still scared her, in case loneliness came back too fast. At some point, she whispered her name through the darkness. "Martha Lee," Boaz murmured. "Evening, Martha Lee." She said nothing more, but the sound of her name in someone else's mouth seemed to settle the air. 3 days later, he found her in the kitchen, trying to reach a skillet. "Couldn't sleep," she said, eyes misty. "Figured I'd cook what's left of me." "You cook?" he asked. "I was a midwife. Fed babies and fathers. They said I made broth taste like hope." Boaz stepped past her, lifted the pan without effort. "Then start with hope," he said. "We got plenty water." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was waiting. Outside, the prairie wind softened. A hawk circled overhead. And in the corner of the porch, beneath a crooked beam, the first sunflower of the season opened its face to the sun. Somewhere, past fences and judgment, two lives had begun to share the same hour. And neither one knew what to call it yet. But it was something stronger than pity, gentler than debt, warmer than guilt. It was presence. And that, Boaz thought, might be enough for now. The mornings came slow on Cutter's ranch, like old men easing into their boots. The rooster never rushed, and neither did Boaz. He stepped into his days with the caution of someone who'd lived too long in his own silence. But now, the silence was shared. Martha Lee moved through the house like a whisper. She didn't creak floorboards or rattle drawers. She just appeared where needed, draping linens to dry, sorting beans in a chip bowl, folding Boaz's shirts without being asked. She never asked for anything either, not even her own place at the table, though he gave it to her anyway. On the 5th morning, she was outside at dawn, sitting on the porch with her ankles crossed, a spool of thread in her lap, and her hair combed down tight. She watched the sun stretch across the dirt, like it was a long-lost friend returning from war. "You always been alone?" she asked as Boaz stepped past with a feed bucket. "Long enough to stop minding it," he said. "But not long enough to stop needing someone?" she asked without looking at him. Boaz didn't answer. He just kept walking. The barn door creaked open. Chickens shuffled. Horses waited. He tossed feed, tended water, and listened to the quiet between hoofbeats. But that morning, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Back in the house, she left a biscuit and eggs for him on the counter. He sat, ate. She didn't ask how it tasted, and he didn't offer. At midday, Boaz hitched the wagon. Need to go to town. Martha watched from the porch, wiping her hands on a cloth already clean. "Get thread if they have it. I'd like to mend the curtains." "You coming?" She blinked like he'd asked her to walk across the ocean. "You sure?" "I'm not a man who asks questions he don't mean." She nodded once, then went inside to wrap a shawl around her shoulders and pull her hair back. When she returned, she had a soft tremble in her knees but a straighter back. Boaz helped her into the wagon. Didn't speak, just adjusted the seat cushion, so her hip wouldn't ache on the ride. The road to town was lined with wild sumac, its leaves turning red too early. A breeze stirred the dust but never lifted it. Martha held her shawl tight beneath her chin and watched the horizon, as if waiting for someone to chase them. "You nervous?" he asked finally. She hesitated. "They won't remember me as kind. They'll remember what they want. Not your fault what memory they choose." She looked at him sideways, something unreadable in her gaze. "Boaz, why'd you take me home?" He took a long moment. "Because I didn't like how the world was looking when I saw you on that fence." She didn't smile, but she rested her hand on the bench between them for a second, just enough to say, "I heard you." Town hadn't changed. It rarely did. The general store still leaned to the left like it had gout. Children still kicked pebbles in front of the church steps. And Eloise Tappan still had her nose planted deep in every new arrival. When Boaz helped Martha down from the wagon, the street went quiet. Not the respectful kind, just the sharp-eyed, open-mouthed kind, judging silence. Eloise stood near the seamstress shop, her mouth pursed like she just tasted vinegar. "Well," she said loudly, "miracles come in all shapes." Boaz didn't acknowledge her. He just walked beside Martha like she was kin. Inside the store, Martha held her posture like it was armor. Boaz picked flour, salt, 2 candles, a tin of coffee. Martha found thread, a spool of yellow ribbon, and a jar of buttons that caught light like glass eyes. The shopkeeper stared at her too long. "You need something else, miss?" he asked slowly, like maybe she hadn't heard him. "No, sir," she replied, voice steady. "I'm old, not deaf." Boaz cleared his throat. "You got soap?" The man nodded quickly and went to fetch it. On the way out, Eloise was waiting. "Some say you were left cause of what you done," she said, arms folded. Martha didn't flinch. "And what do you say?" "I say I never like your son." Martha exhaled. "That makes 2 of us." Boaz stepped between them. "We done here." Back in the wagon, the ride home was quieter. Martha finally said, "I expected worse." Boaz nodded. "Sometimes folks run out of new things to whisper. Just reheat the old ones." "I used to care what they thought," she said. "Now I just wonder how many of them I helped birth." Boaz glanced at her. "You remember them all?" She gave a slow smile, the kind that didn't need teeth. "Not their faces. But I remember the way their mothers breathed, like their ribs might snap from trying to keep the world from falling in." He looked down, thought of his own mother, the way she hummed while hanging laundry, how her hands had smelled like rosemary and ash. That night, Martha cooked again. Boaz came in with mud on his boots, and she didn't scold him, but her eyes flicked toward the mat by the door like she used to do with her son. Boaz caught the hint, wiped his boots. Saturday. She placed stew in front of him, sat across. No words were spoken for the first few bites. Then she said, "I used to think I'd die in a room no one knew I was in." He paused, spoon in hand. "But I think I already did," she continued. "That fence wasn't just wood. It was forgetting. My son didn't tie me to it. He erased me with it." Boaz didn't speak, just nodded once and went back to eating. That was how he listened. The next morning, he rose to find the porch swept, his shirts folded in a stack by the stove, and a small sunflower in a cup on the sill. Not store-bought, wild. He stepped outside, looked toward the field. Martha stood beneath the fence where he'd found her, not tied, not hunched, just standing, as if paying respect to a version of herself left behind. She didn't see him watching. She just leaned down and placed a single stone on the dirt. When she returned to the house, she said, "Sometimes you have to mark the grave of who you were, or else she follows you everywhere." Boaz replied, "She can follow you if she wants, long as she walks quiet." Martha gave a faint laugh. It startled her. That day they didn't speak much, but Boaz found himself glancing toward the window more often, just to make sure she was still there. In the afternoon, rain came. Not heavy, just a polite drizzle, enough to make the porch smell like old pine and cooled earth. Martha stepped outside barefoot, arms out. He watched from inside, arms crossed. "Rain don't judge," she said aloud, though he wasn't sure if it was for him or herself. He stepped out after a moment, let the rain hit his shoulders. It slid down his neck like a forgotten memory. "You don't mind it?" he asked. "I used to dance in it." "Why'd you stop?" "Too many watchers. Not enough dancers." Boaz looked down. Then, quiet as a secret, he reached for her hand. Not to hold, just to steady. Her fingers curled around his like they remembered something his never knew. That night, Boaz found her asleep in the chair by the hearth. The fire was out, but her breath was even. He draped a blanket over her shoulders. She murmured something, might have been his name, or just the wind's echo in her throat. Boaz didn't wake her, just stood a moment longer. There was something healing in that silence. not the kind born from emptiness, the kind born from not needing to speak. In the dark, the world outside kept turning. But inside the ranch house, two strangers were forgetting how to be strangers. The day began with frost creeping along the window panes like quiet visitors from past. Boaz stood shirtless in front of the stove, pouring water into the basin to wash. His shoulders bore the marks of years alone. Sunburnt skin, healed scars from branding calves and breaking colts. Behind him, the wooden floor whispered as Martha Lee crossed the kitchen, shawl draped over her shoulders like a memory she still needed to wear. "You work too early," she said, voice scratchy but certain. Boaz didn't turn. Work don't care about the time. He splashed water across his neck. Martha filled a second kettle, moved with the ease of someone who had once managed a household with 6 children, though she'd only birthed one. That kettle hissed louder than either of them. She said, "You never speak of family." "I got none to speak of." Martha stirred a spoon to the pot of oats and didn't ask more. That was something about her Boaz had come to rely on. She didn't ask things she wouldn't answer herself. And when she did answer, it was never loud. Later, Boaz rode into the hills to check the outer fence. Martha remained, polishing the window glass with vinegar and cloth, humming under her breath. The tune was from some church she'd long since stopped attending, but the habit clung to her like lace. While she scrubbed, she caught a reflection, creased cheeks, silver brows, lips drawn thin. She didn't mourn anymore, but some mornings it startled her to see the woman her son claimed was a burden. At midday, a knock came on the door. Martha opened it, apron dusted with flour. A young girl stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in a man's coat 2 sizes too large. Her belly was swollen, hands trembling. "Ma'am," the girl whispered. "They said the midwife lived here." Martha blinked. "You must mean, they said you used to—" "I got no one else," the girl whispered, looking past her as if expecting to be turned away. "Come inside, child." Boaz returned to find the girl asleep on the settee, belly tight under the coat. Martha met him at the door, her face set. "She's due tonight. No husband, no kin, just fear and a leaking roof over wherever she crawled out of." Boaz looked at the girl. "You think you're up to it?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "I was delivering babies when your mother still braided your hair. I imagine. I never had braids. You never had softness, either." He bit the inside of his cheek to hide a grin. That night, thunder rolled low like cattle in the distance. Rain tapped at the roof and wind lit the shutters. Inside, the world held its breath. Martha prepared the room with methodical grace. Boaz fetched water, boiled towels, stoked the fire. He watched as the old woman's hands moved, confident, fluid, purposeful. Hands that had once sewn sutures with thread not fit for shirts. Hands that had steadied newborn heads and shut the eyes of stillborns. The girl's labor began with muffled cries. Martha pressed a palm to the girl's forehead and whispered things Boaz couldn't hear. He stood outside the room, fists in his pockets, as if guarding a frontier. Hours passed. Dawn crept toward the windows like a shy animal. And then a cry. High, sudden, sharp as sunrise. Then another. A second cry, softer, echoing the first. Twins. Martha emerged, soaked in sweat and joy. She didn't smile with her mouth, but her whole face lifted. "She did it," she said simply. "2 girls." Boaz nodded. "And you?" "I did what I was made to do." He looked at her hands, reddened, veined, strong, still steady. "They remembered," she whispered. Martha stayed with the girl till noon, cleaned her, wrapped the babies, fed her broth like a mother would. When the girl finally spoke, it was only to ask, "What should I name them?" Martha said, "Name them after no man who left you." She looked at Boaz. "Name them after the wind in the field. Something that don't disappear." The girl nodded. "I think I'll call one Lee." Martha turned away quickly, but Boaz saw her fingers tremble just once. When the girl left 3 days later, Boaz offered her half a loaf and a flask of cider. She pressed his hand and mouthed "thank you," though no sound came. Martha watched from the window. That night, She sat by the fire with a thimble in her lap and her feet tucked under a quilt. Boaz brought her tea and a plate of cornbread. "I've seen that look before," he said. She didn't lift her head. "What look?" "The one where your body did something right, and your heart didn't believe it was allowed to feel proud." She sighed. "I forgot how much living there is in saving a life. Even one." "You didn't forget," he said. "You just needed the right hour to remember." She smiled gently. "It's hard to be seen. Harder still to be needed. But it's hardest of all to remember you were ever more than your shame." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind settled. Boaz sat beside her on the floor, arms resting on his knees. "You weren't ever shame." She looked down at her hands. "No, but I let someone say I was. And I believed it for too long. Not anymore." She turned her face toward him. "How can you be sure?" "Because I saw you bring 2 lives into this world with nothing but your hands and a prayer," he said. "And anyone who can do that ain't something to pity." She reached for his cup and took a sip. He didn't stop her. That moment, quiet, small, and shared, felt louder than any sermon. Later, she told him about the first baby she ever delivered. "The father was so scared he fainted in the snow," she said. "I had to drag him back inside by his collar." Boaz chuckled. "Men ain't built for blood." "Some of us aren't built for watching others break," she whispered. "But I was." "You still are." She held the cup tighter. "Maybe that's the cruelest kindness. To still be able to help, even when no one wants you." "I want you," Boaz said. She didn't react, but her eyes glistened with something soft. She looked toward the window, where the last of the sun slipped behind the hills. "You speak like someone who's lost something, too." "I have," he replied, "but you're not one of those things." For a long moment, the only sound was the pop of a burning log. Then she said, "I didn't think I'd ever feel part of the world again." He replied, "You didn't just join it. You brought 2 new lives into it." She closed her eyes. "Then I guess I earned tomorrow." The sky was wrong that morning. Boaz felt it before he saw it. An ache in the air, the way animals pause before lightning. The clouds were low and belly with threat, thick as was soaked in memory. Wind whispered along the roof line of the house, tickling loose shingles and sighing like someone old and unresolved. Martha Lee stood at the stove, stirring broth with the kind of attention that meant she wasn't really thinking about soup. Her hands moved, but her mind had drifted. She hadn't hummed in days, not since the girl had left with the twins. She'd folded the empty cradle blanket once, then again, and tucked into the back of the linen drawer. She never mentioned it afterward. Boaz laced his boots slower than usual. Something behind his ribs itched like warning. It wasn't until the dust trail showed on the ridge, too fast, too direct, that he knew. A single rider, hat tilted low, shoulders square, and posture that carried entitlement like a badge. Caleb Dawson. Boaz didn't move to meet him. He just waited on the porch with his arms crossed and a steady jaw. The horse thundered to a halt, foam at the bit. Caleb looked older than Boaz remembered from churchyard gossip. Broad in the shoulders, eyes sharp, mouth cruel. He had the face of a man used to being obeyed, even by those he hurt. "I heard you've been keeping my mother," Caleb said without dismounting. Boaz didn't answer. "She's mine, my responsibility, my shame, too. I got it right." "You had it right," Boaz said evenly. "You gave it up when you left her to die with the fence for a headstone." Caleb's lip curled. She wasn't dying. Boaz nodded toward the house. She was closer to dead than loved. The screen door opened behind them. Martha stepped out, shawl tight, chin higher than it had been in years. "Caleb," she said, voice steady. He turned, and for just a breath his face faltered. "Mama," he said. "Don't call me that," she replied. He shifted in his saddle, then dismounted, walked up the steps like he had every right to reclaim what he abandoned. "I came to bring you back." She didn't move. "Why?" "Because people are talking, saying I left you, saying I'm a disgrace." "You are." His mouth opened, but the words stuck. "I have a life here now," she said, "with a man who pities you." Boaz didn't flinch. but his hands curled into fists at his sides. Martha stepped down the porch, slow but unshaking. This man saw me when you didn't, fed me, sheltered me, let me earn peace again. You were my burden to carry, Caleb snapped. You think some land and sympathy changed that? No, she said softly. I think you dropped the burden long before he offered to lift it. The wind picked up. Leaves whipped across the yard. A screen door slammed somewhere down the valley. Thunder groaned far off. Caleb grabbed her wrist. Boaz was there before the breath could catch in Martha's throat. Let go, Boaz said, voice calm. She's mine, Caleb said through gritted teeth. You don't own her. Caleb shoved him. It wasn't much a shove, born of ego, not strength, but Boaz had spent too many years breaking colts and splitting cedar to be moved by noise. He swung once. It was enough. Caleb staggered back, fell off the step into the dirt, blood already running from his nose. He scrambled up like a wounded dog, wild-eyed. You think she's worth fighting for? That she's worth anything now. Martha spoke before Boaz could. I'm worth something because you think I'm not, she said. Because you threw me away and I still found light. Caleb wiped his mouth. This ain't over. Boaz stepped between them. It is. Thunder cracked above, louder now. The storm rolled in like vengeance. Caleb turned, spat in the dirt, and mounted his horse. Without another word, he rode off, dust curling behind him like the remnants of a curse. Martha sagged slightly once he was gone. Boaz reached to steady her, but she didn't let herself fall. She just breathed deep, eyes wet but proud. Inside, the rain came heavy and fast. They sat by the fire, both silent. The wind howled against the walls, but inside was still. You didn't have to hit him, she said finally. Boaz looked at his knuckles. Didn't do it for you. Her eyes narrowed. Did it for me. Because I'm tired of letting men walk away after they hurt people like you. She exhaled. Still, thank you. The fire crackled. Boaz tossed another log in, then stood and walked to the shelf, pulled down a small wooden box. Inside were letters, some yellowed, some never opened. He handed her one. My mother wrote to you, he said, but she never sent it. Martha unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was familiar, looped, firm, scented faintly of press herbs. It spoke of regret, of how Martha Lee had been the only friend who stayed after the war took their men, how she'd envied Martha's strength, how she'd wished to say sorry for the things she'd said when age began to settle unevenly between them. Martha read it twice, then folded it back and held it to her chest. She was a good woman, she said, even when her pride got loud. You were her favorite. I didn't believe that, Martha whispered, till now. Boaz knelt beside her. You ever wonder if the best parts of our lives come too late? She asked. He shook his head. They come when we're finally ready to hold them. Outside, the storm waned. They stood together at the window. Rain clung to the glass, but light began to press through. The storm hadn't destroyed. It had only reminded them of what stood firm. Boaz stepped out onto the porch. The sky was clearing, rinsed clean. He walked to the fence post, the one she'd been tied to that first day. He knelt, dug a small hole, planted sunflower seeds from the pouch in his coat. Martha joined him. No words, just silence and breath and soil between fingers. Later, inside, Boaz made coffee while she folded the dishcloths just right. He said, You've a place here if you want it. She smiled without showing teeth. I already took it. He nodded. Then she added, But if it's all the same to you, I'll take your name too. He looked up. You don't need to marry me, she said. But I like the world to know someone claimed me. Not as a mother, not as a burden, just as Martha Lee Cutter. He said nothing, just walked over, pressed his hand to hers. Not as a vow, not as possession, but as proof. The next morning, they painted her name on the mailbox in steady black letters, M.L. Cutter, and beside it, he carved a sunflower. Sometimes love didn't need to be named out loud. Sometimes it just needed a storm to prove what was worth standing for.